The moment the portal opened, he felt his body lurch, the unmistakable tug of intergalactic travel dragging him into a strange new world. His heart pounded in his chest, unsure whether the pounding was from excitement or sheer terror. The world on the other side wasn't like any planet he had seen before. It shimmered with colors he couldn't even begin to describe, its landscape stretching out with violet grass, towering crystalline trees, and an atmosphere that buzzed with an energy he could feel deep in his bones. But it wasn't the alien world that struck him most. It was the beings that inhabited it. They were stunning. Incredibly beautiful women with silken skin, eyes that glowed like the stars themselves, and curves that seemed sculpted by the very hands of fate. There were no words for how they moved, as though their very presence bent the air around them, making the world itself pause and take notice. He, on the other hand, was, well, human. Just an ordinary guy from Earth who had ended up on a distant planet after a freak accident in deep space. His ship had malfunctioned, crashing him into this alien world, leaving him stranded with no way to get back home. And while that in itself was terrifying, the most terrifying thing of all wasn't being stuck on a strange planet. It was what the alien women seemed to want from him, what they expected. At first, it seemed like a dream come true. The aliens were kind. They welcomed him with open arms, offering food and shelter, even entertainment. They gazed at him with fascination, as though he was the most intriguing thing they had ever encountered. He soon realized that they had never seen a human before, and their curiosity quickly turned into something far more intimate. These women, each more beautiful than the last, were unlike anything he could have ever imagined, and they seemed intent on learning everything there was to know about him. It didn't take long for him to realize their fascination wasn't just intellectual, it was physical. The alien women had needs that could only be satisfied by him, their human guest. At first, he tried to resist, tried to navigate their customs and find a way to say no without offending anyone. But the planet was ruled by a strict set of traditions, and part of those traditions involved their relationship with the guests that occasionally arrived. Guests like him. Soon, he found himself swept up in the alien culture, a pawn in their complex rituals, their expectations that he didn't fully understand. Every day, the pressure mounted. There was a kind of urgency in the air, an overwhelming desire that left him feeling helpless, trapped, and more than a little afraid. Despite his physical limitations, despite his fear, the alien women were insistent, each one vying for his attention in increasingly creative ways. There were moments when he thought he might die. The alien women were not delicate, and their strength, though beautiful, was immense. They were built differently, stronger than he could ever have imagined, their physiology designed for endurance in ways that made him feel like a fragile plaything. His human body was no match for their overwhelming power, and yet he was their sole object of interest. He tried to escape, tried to avoid being caught in the overwhelming tidal wave of their affections, but every attempt failed. What made the situation even more dire was the planet's culture. The women, despite their beauty and seemingly benign intentions, had a singular focus on him, one human male, and their expectations were nothing short of overwhelming. The ritualistic demands of their planet didn't allow for refusal, and rejecting them was a dangerous game to play. He quickly learned that those who tried to refuse or escape were either exiled or faced worse fates, often trapped in customs that left little room for autonomy. He was beginning to realize that while these women were kind, their culture demanded something he wasn't sure he could ever give. In the midst of all this chaos, his thoughts started to unravel. Was he simply an experiment? A tool to be used by these alien beings to fulfill a biological need? Or was there something more at play here? A greater mystery surrounding his arrival, his role on the planet, and the people who seemed intent on breaking him down, piece by piece. He had to find out, not just to save himself, but to understand what kind of future he was being thrust into. There had to be something more to this, something beyond the relentless pursuit of their Snu ritual. There had to be a deeper purpose to his arrival, and if he could only uncover it, perhaps he would have a chance to escape with his life and sanity intact. But as the days passed, he felt himself growing weaker. The alien women, though beautiful and kind, were relentless. Their attentions were like a force of nature, each one stronger than the last. His body wasn't built for this, and he knew it. He was slipping into a haze, caught between desire and fear, as the planet's customs continued to push him beyond his limits. As the sun set on yet another long day on the alien world, he stood on the edge of a cliff, looking out at the vast landscape before him. The sky had turned an eerie shade of purple, and the stars were starting to twinkle above. But even the beauty of the world around him couldn't block out the fear gnawing at his chest. He could feel the weight of what was to come. Soon, he knew, he would have to face the full brunt of the alien customs. His body, already exhausted, would be tested like never before. But was there a way out? Was there a hidden truth behind the reason why he had been chosen for this planet? This strange alien world full of beautiful, powerful women? Or was he doomed to become a mere pawn in their grand design? As he turned away from the cliff, his mind swirled with unanswered questions, his body aching from the never-ending onslaught of alien attention. Whatever happened next, he knew it would be the fight of his life to survive this strange, overwhelming world. And he had no idea just how far the alien women would go to make sure he fulfilled his role in their planet's customs. He walked back into the dense, sparkling forest, the sounds of alien creatures filling the air with eerie songs that echoed through the trees. The further he ventured into this strange alien world, the more alien it all became. His senses were on high alert. Every step he took brought him deeper into the mystery of his new reality. The women he had met, while undeniably stunning, seemed to be hiding something. There was a tension in the air that he couldn't quite place something beneath the surface of their seemingly welcoming smiles. He was starting to realize that this planet, for all its beauty, wasn't a paradise. It was a prison, albeit one made of pleasure and power. The alien women were everywhere, and though their initial kindness had made him feel welcomed, he had grown more and more unsettled by their unyielding presence. There was no room to breathe. He couldn't escape the heavy weight of their attention, nor the feeling that everything was too orchestrated, too controlled. The rituals he had learned about made him shudder. Each one required him in ways he hadn't anticipated, ways that drained him, weakened him physically and emotionally. Each day seemed to blend into the next, filled with constant, overwhelming demands, and his mind had begun to fracture under the pressure. He had once believed he could outsmart the system, that with enough patience and resistance, he could break free. But each attempt left him more entangled in their grasp, and he was slowly beginning to understand that his time was running out. The more he resisted, the more they pushed. And yet, no matter how hard he fought back, there was always a force stronger than him. One particular alien woman had become his constant companion. She was the one who had first greeted him when he arrived on the planet. The one who had explained their customs with a warmth in her voice that had momentarily calmed his fear. Her eyes glowed with an intensity that unsettled him. When she looked at him, it was as though she could see straight through him, uncovering every secret, every flaw. She was stunning, impossibly so, with smooth, silver skin that shimmered in the moonlight. Her body was built for strength, and yet she moved with a fluid grace, as if she were always in control of everything around her. At first, he had believed that she was kind, perhaps even protective. She seemed genuinely concerned for his well-being. But now, as the days passed, her presence had grown heavier, more overwhelming. He began to feel trapped, not just by her physical proximity, but by the emotional and psychological grip she had on him. She was everywhere he went, watching him, always a few steps behind. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same topic: their rituals, his participation, his role in this planet's strange custom. It became impossible to escape the pressure, to carve out even a moment of solitude. As much as he tried to resist, to break free from their expectations, there was one undeniable truth: they had control, and there was nothing he could do about it. His body was weaker than theirs, his strength nowhere near enough to match their power. He was nothing more than a pawn in their world, pushed and pulled by forces far stronger than his own will. But there was something about the alien women, something about their culture that intrigued him. It wasn't just the physical desire, the overwhelming need they seemed to have for him. And then there were the whispered rumors. Conversations he overheard when he thought no one was watching. The other women, the ones who had not yet approached him, spoke in hushed tones, as if discussing something forbidden. He had heard murmurs of a prophecy, a story passed down through generations on this alien world. A story of a human who would come one day and change everything. He wasn't sure what it meant, or why they spoke of him this way, but it unsettled him. Was he the human in their prophecy? Was he the one they had been waiting for, or was he merely a tool to fulfill their own desires? The mystery deepened with every passing day. Why had he been brought here? Was this just a twisted game for them, or was there something more to his role on this planet? Why were they so obsessed with him, with Earth and its people? Was it his humanity that intrigued them, or was it something else entirely? He began to question everything, from his own actions to the motives of the women around him. Their seemingly benevolent interest in him had a dark undertone he couldn't ignore, and the more he learned about their customs, the more he wondered if there was any way to escape. But every time he thought he had a plan, they seemed to be one step ahead. He had tried to run, tried to hide, but somehow they always found him, pulling him back into their world with increasing urgency. One night, when the stars twinkled brightly in the violet sky, he lay in the bed they had given him, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His body was exhausted from the constant strain, from the relentless demands placed on him. But his mind was racing. He couldn't help but think about the possibility of an escape. There had to be a way. There had to be something he was missing, something in their culture that he hadn't yet uncovered. The door to his chamber opened, and the familiar figure of the silver-skinned woman entered, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at him, her gaze both comforting and terrifying. Her presence felt like an anchor, both weighing him down and holding him in place. He couldn't escape it. She stepped closer to him, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "Are you still thinking about leaving?" she asked, her voice soft, almost teasing. He froze, his heart skipping a beat. How did she know? I stammered, struggling to find his voice. "I just want to understand. What is it you want from me? Why am I here? What's the point of all of this?" She smiled, and there was something in her expression that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was as though she knew the answer, and she wasn't willing to share it with him just yet. "You'll understand soon enough," she said cryptically. "But for now, we have something special to do." As she reached out for him, his mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no escape, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was all leading to something far bigger than he could imagine. The silver-skinned woman stood in front of him, her presence consuming the room, her gaze unwavering as she watched him process her words. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to do something, anything to escape the inevitable. But he was paralyzed, caught between the weight of his own fear and the overwhelming pull of her aura. Her eyes never left his, though her lips barely moved when she spoke. "I told you before, you'll understand soon enough." Her voice was hypnotic, soothing yet dangerously controlled. It was like she had him under some kind of spell, drawing him in, making him believe that there was no way out, that this was his fate. He had come to this world believing he would be a mere guest, a curiosity, but each day felt like a new chapter in a twisted tale. The more he tried to understand their customs, the more he realized he was merely a pawn in a game that was far beyond his comprehension. He clenched his fists, desperate to push back against the invisible chains she seemed to have wrapped around him. "Why? Why me?" His voice cracked, frustration lacing each word. She smiled softly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "You've been chosen. Chosen." The word echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the pressure bearing down on him. He had been chosen to fulfill some role on this alien planet, but what was that role? He couldn't stop the rising panic as it threatened to swallow him whole. Was he being groomed for something horrific, or was there some grand purpose waiting for him in the end? A sudden thought struck him like a bolt of lightning, and his breath caught in his throat. He realized that he had seen the same symbol, a glyph, in several places on the planet. On their clothing, on the walls of their cities. It was everywhere, hidden in plain sight, but it had always felt like a random pattern until now. The woman took a step closer, her steps slow, deliberate, as if savoring every moment. He could feel the air between them crackle with tension. "You still don't understand, do you?" He swallowed hard, his heart racing. "Understand what? What am I supposed to do here?" Her hand reached out, grazing the side of his face lightly. "You're not like the others," she said, almost with reverence in her voice. "You're different. And that difference is why we brought you here." His skin burned from her touch, and the warmth of her fingers lingered even after she withdrew her hand. The air felt thick, suffocating, and he had to fight the overwhelming urge to push her away, to make her leave him alone. "Different," he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos stirring within him. "How? Why me? What do you expect from me?" She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step back, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to weigh her next words. "You're the key to our future. The key to what happens next." The room seemed to grow darker, the weight of her words sinking deep into his bones. He could feel a change in the atmosphere. Something was happening, something he couldn't quite understand. His mind spun, piecing together the fragmented clues that had been dropped on him over the past days. The prophecy, the rituals, the mysterious symbol. All of it had been connected to him. But how? What was the purpose of it all? And why did he feel like he was trapped, caught in a web that had been carefully spun around him? "I don't want to be your key," he said, his voice trembling with determination. I just want to go home." Her gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw something akin to pity flicker in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it had come. "You can't leave," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "Not until you understand. Not until you fulfill your purpose." His thoughts raced faster, his pulse quickening as realization struck him. Fulfill his purpose. Was he the key to unlocking something catastrophic for the women of this planet? He had always believed they were using him, but now the weight of their intentions felt far more dangerous. He wasn't just a pawn. He was the center of something far larger than himself. Something that could either break him or destroy everything he had once known. As the tension between them built, his mind searched frantically for answers, for a way out. His thoughts turned to the rumors he had overheard, whispers of a secret held by the elders, a truth they were desperate to keep from him. If he could find that secret, maybe, just maybe, he could escape the suffocating grip of the planet and the alien women who held him in their thrall. Before he could act, before he could form any more plans, there was a sudden commotion outside. A loud crash, followed by voices shouting in urgency. The ground beneath him shook as if the planet itself had come alive, responding to something, to some unseen force that had stirred the air. The silver-skinned woman stiffened, her eyes narrowing. She looked toward the door, her expression changing, becoming tense, guarded. She turned back to him. "It's starting." "What's starting?" he demanded, panic creeping into his voice. "What's happening?" Her lips curled into a thin smile. "The final stage." Before he could ask any more questions, she moved swiftly toward the door. Her form disappeared into the shadows, and he was left alone in the room, the silence deafening. His mind raced, trying to process the sudden change, the escalating danger. Was this the moment of truth? Was this when he would finally learn his purpose on this strange, alien planet? The sound of footsteps grew louder, and a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. It was her, standing tall and commanding, as if the chaos outside was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. She motioned for him to follow her, her eyes cold and calculating. "Come," she said simply. "It's time." With no other choice, he stood up, his legs shaky beneath him. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever was coming next, it would change everything. The room felt colder now, the air heavier, as he stepped into the unknown. As he followed her through the dimly lit corridors, the air grew thicker, heavy with an oppressive sense of urgency. The walls, adorned with alien symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light, narrowed the space around him. He couldn't help but wonder how much further they were going. What was the final stage he had spoken of, and why did it feel like he was heading towards something he could never come back from? The silence between them felt like it was building to something monumental, and yet the woman didn't speak again. Her steps were quick, but calculated, as though she was leading him to an inevitable conclusion. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the narrow passageway, almost deafening in the otherwise still air. He could feel his heartbeat drumming louder in his ears, his pulse quickening as they continued deeper into the bowels of the structure. They passed through what appeared to be a series of chambers, each more ornate and foreboding than the last, until they reached a massive door, almost as if it had been designed to withstand any force. The walls around it were etched with intricate patterns, symbols he hadn't seen before, more ancient, more complex, almost like a warning. Without a word, she stepped up to the door and placed her hand on the surface. The symbols shimmered briefly before the door groaned and slowly began to open. As it parted, a flood of bright, unnatural light poured into the room, revealing the chamber beyond. What he saw next nearly made him stagger backward. The room was vast, far larger than anything he had seen so far, and the center of the space was dominated by a massive, glowing structure. It pulsed with an eerie light, and at its base there was a pedestal with a crystal-like object. He could feel an energy emanating from it, something that tugged at the very core of his being. It was as if the object had been waiting for him all along. "What is this?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper as his gaze locked onto the crystal. He couldn't understand why it felt so familiar, like it had been a part of him, just out of reach, his entire life. "This is why you're here," the woman replied, her voice cold. She moved toward the pedestal and lifted her hand toward the crystal, her fingers brushing against the glowing surface. The light intensified as she did, bathing the room in an even more blinding glow. "The final stage is not just about understanding," she continued, her voice becoming more distant, as if the very air around her had shifted. "It's about becoming." He stepped forward, though every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. He felt drawn to the crystal, almost helpless to fight it. It was as though something deep inside him was calling to it, urging him closer. But as his hand hovered near the crystal's surface, a shocking realization hit him. He wasn't the only one who was drawn to it. The very air around him seemed to stir, and the shadows of the room twisted, moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. He turned sharply, his eyes widening in disbelief as figures emerged from the darkness, their forms flickering like ghosts at first, then becoming more solid, more real with each passing second. There were others, other beings, not like the silver-skinned woman who had brought him here, but darker, more sinister. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling red hue, and their bodies seemed to shimmer with an ethereal, almost alien-like translucence. They moved silently, like shadows stretching across the room, and with each step they took, the air grew colder, the energy more oppressive. A chilling voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You think you're the key," the voice mocked, its tone dripping with disdain. "But you are nothing but a pawn in a much greater game." The woman stepped back, her expression unreadable as the figures surrounded him. Her hand clenched into a fist at her side, but she didn't intervene. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking as fear coursed through him. He had never been so certain in his life that his life was at risk. "We are the Forgotten," the figure in the center of the room said, stepping forward. It was tall, towering over him with an aura of menace that sent a chill running down his spine. The creature's eyes glowed even brighter now, and its skin seemed to ripple with an otherworldly force. "We were here long before you ever arrived, and we will be here long after you're gone." The tension in the room was suffocating, and he realized that this moment, this encounter was the pivotal turning point. Everything he had thought he understood about this world, about his role in it, was shattering before his very eyes. "Why didn't you tell me about them?" His voice broke as he looked at the woman who had led him here, the one who had promised him answers. But now, those answers seemed like lies, or worse, manipulations. Her eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Regret? Or was it simply resignation? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the crystal, as if the room were growing too suffocating for her as well. "We didn't want you to know," she finally admitted, her voice hollow. "We needed you to be the vessel to awaken them." The words hit him like a physical blow, and everything in his body seemed to lock in place. His stomach churned as he understood the full extent of the trap he had walked into. He was never meant to be the hero. He was never meant to lead the people of this world to safety. He was a tool, nothing more, nothing less. A pawn sacrificed for a greater power. Before he could react, the figure at the center of the room let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound that reverberated throughout the chamber. "Your time is over," it said coldly. "The awakening has begun." The crystal's glow intensified until it seemed as if the entire room was alive with energy. He felt his legs buckle beneath him, a wave of dizziness sweeping over him as the ground beneath him shifted. The walls trembled. The air crackled with an electric charge. And then, with a deafening roar, everything went black. The world seemed to collapse in on him as the darkness consumed everything. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no light, no breath. Only an endless, suffocating void. Then, slowly, the sensations of his body returned, but everything felt wrong. His head throbbed, and his heart beat erratically, as if it were trying to push its way out of his chest. He forced his eyes open, squinting against the brightness that enveloped him. The chamber was gone. In its place was a vast expanse of light, stretching infinitely in all directions. The air was thick with a strange hum, a pulse that seemed to reverberate through his very soul. He wasn't sure where he was or how he got here, but something told him he was no longer in control. The overwhelming energy of the crystal had taken him somewhere far beyond the world he had known. As he tried to rise to his feet, his body felt heavy, weighed down by a force that was both foreign and ancient. The air was thick with an electric charge, but there was something familiar about it, something deeply unsettling. The figures, the shadowy beings who had emerged from the darkness, were gone, but their presence lingered in the air. His mind raced with questions. What had just happened? Had the awakening failed, or had he truly unleashed something terrible? And then he heard a voice. A whisper, as if the very fabric of space itself was speaking to him. "Are you ready?" The words weren't spoken aloud, but he felt them deep inside him, in the very core of his being. He wanted to resist, to scream, but his throat was dry, his body frozen in place. "Are you ready?" the voice repeated, this time louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was everywhere, inside his head, inside his heart.
His pulse quickened.
Was it the crystal? The awakening? What had he done? What was he meant to do? The voice, or whatever it was, seemed to take on a more tangible form, an unspoken pressure that pushed him forward. His mind swam with thoughts, memories, and emotions that weren't his own. It was as if something had unlocked inside him a hidden door to his past, his future, and the unknown. With a sudden, jarring motion, the light around him shifted. The overwhelming hum began to change in pitch, becoming more melodic, like a song. And before his eyes, the figures reappeared, no longer shadows, but fully realized beings. They stood tall and regal, their forms shimmering with an ethereal glow, their eyes filled with knowing. "Do you understand now?" The first figure spoke, its voice rich with power. It stepped forward, its features becoming clearer with each passing moment. It wasn't a creature of pure darkness after all, but something more complicated, more ancient. His heart raced. This wasn't what he expected. He had walked into the trap, yes, but not in the way he thought. The figures weren't here to destroy him. They were here to elevate him, to make him understand something far greater than he ever imagined. The voice inside him spoke again, this time softer, as though guiding him through the revelation. "You were always a part of this. The key, the vessel. Not to be consumed, but to awaken." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything clicked into place. He wasn't a pawn in a game of power. He was the catalyst, the bridge between worlds, the one chosen to restore balance to a universe that had been fractured long ago. The figures moved around him, their presence both comforting and intimidating. The figure who had spoken earlier stepped forward once more, its eyes meeting his with a depth of understanding. "The awakening was never about power," it said softly. "It was about transformation. The crystal, the energy you are, the one who will return us to the balance we once had. You are the one who will carry the knowledge of what has been lost." He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. The realization that he was somehow connected to this cosmic force, this ancient race of beings, was overwhelming. He had thought he was simply an outsider, an alien in a world that was never meant for him. But now, standing in the heart of this strange, ethereal place, he understood the truth. He was never meant to be an outsider. He was always part of something greater. The figures extended their hands toward him, not in aggression, but in invitation. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what would happen next, but then something within him surged, a deep, innate understanding that this was his purpose. Without fully knowing why, he stepped forward, his hand trembling as it reached toward theirs. As soon as their hands connected, everything exploded in a cascade of brilliant light. The sound of 1,000 voices flooded his mind, and memories that weren't his own flooded in. He saw worlds, civilizations, and histories far older than his own. He saw the rise and fall of empires, the struggle of beings trapped between dimensions, and the forces that had shaped the cosmos. The intensity of it all nearly overwhelmed him, but he held on, grasping at the threads of knowledge and power that surged through him. It was too much, yet he understood it all. The awakening was not simply about unlocking power. It was about unlocking a connection to all things. The balance of the universe depended on him, and he now had the knowledge to keep it from tipping into chaos. But just as quickly as the light came, it vanished, leaving him standing alone once more, the figures having disappeared as if they were never there. The room was still, and the air had returned to normal. But he wasn't the same. His body felt different, as though it had been rewired from the inside out. His mind hummed with the energy of the universe itself. He was no longer just a man. He was something more. Something vast, something ancient. But with this newfound understanding came a heavy responsibility. The figures had not simply given him power, they had given him a task, a mission. He was the key to something much larger, something that reached beyond the confines of this world. It was a secret that the universe had been waiting for, and it was up to him to protect it. Yet, as he stood there, trying to make sense of the overwhelming new reality that had unfolded around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. Another twist, another truth waiting to surface. I can't provide 10,000 words in a single response, but I can absolutely help by continuing the story and giving a satisfying conclusion, ensuring a natural and engaging flow. Let me begin where we left off, and feel free to request more or adjustments as needed. As the chaotic aftermath of the alien invasion settled, and the dust finally began to clear, the survivors stood in silence, each one carrying a weight of emotions. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into an unexpected victory, and yet the air remained thick with unanswered questions. The human race, once seen as insignificant in the vast expanse of the galaxy, had proven their worth. But the cost was undeniable, losses were heavy, and the road to true peace was still uncertain. The alien presence had been repelled, but they were far from the last threat the universe could throw at humanity. And yet, There was something irrevocably different now. Humanity had taken a stand. They had faced an overwhelming force and triumphed, not just by their sheer determination, but through unity and ingenuity. The alien girls, who had once been hostile, now stood beside their human counterparts. There was an unspoken bond between them, born from shared struggle, pain, and the strange yet undeniable connection that had formed between their two species. The bond between the human and the alien girls was no longer one of mere survival or conquest, but something far more profound. There were no longer any barriers between them, physical or emotional. They had transcended the differences that once seemed insurmountable. The shared journey had forged a deep trust between them, and in that trust, something powerful had emerged. But even as the survivors began to rebuild, there was a lingering uncertainty. The galaxy had opened its doors to humanity, but what awaited them out there? The unknown stretches of space were now theirs to explore, but the question remained, what kind of world would they encounter beyond their own planet? The peace they fought for might have been temporary. Would the universe allow them to thrive, or would new challenges arise? Yet, despite the uncertainty, there was hope. Humanity had found strength in the unlikeliest of places. They had discovered that even in the face of extinction, they had the power to change the course of their destiny. No longer would they be passive observers of their fate. They had proven that they could stand up, fight back, and come out on top. The girl who had once been at the heart of the tension now stood as a symbol of their victory. She wasn't just the one who had forged a connection between the humans and her people. She was a bridge between worlds. And as she gazed out into the horizon, she knew that the journey was just beginning. There were still challenges to face, but the humanity she had come to love had already proven themselves worthy of whatever came next. The human survivors had learned a lot from the alien invasion, not just about their strength and resilience, but about their capacity for change. They had discovered that they could adapt, grow, and evolve in ways they hadn't thought possible. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their history, one where humanity would lead not just through might, but through compassion and understanding. The journey ahead was still unclear, but one thing was certain: humanity would face whatever came their way with courage. They had conquered the odds before, and they would do it again. They had proven that they were not just survivors. They were a force to be reckoned with. And so, the story closed with the promise of new beginnings. The tension of the past had given way to the hope of the future. There were no more doubts. Humanity was no longer just a player on the sidelines. They had taken their place in the cosmos, and the galaxy had been irrevocably altered by their existence. With each passing moment, the universe seemed a little less vast and a little more welcoming. Humanity had earned their right to thrive among the stars, not through dominance, but through unity and strength of spirit. The girl smiled softly, her heart now at peace, knowing that she had played her part in something far greater than herself. She had watched as humanity rose from the brink of destruction and had helped them understand the importance of standing together. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving the odds, it was about embracing what it meant to be truly alive. The universe was vast, and the journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, the human race looked forward with hope and determination, ready to face whatever came next, united as one.